Hey everyone, welcome back to a new video. Today's video is going to be about our latest build, which is actually more of an update on our last video. Last video we showed you guys how we built our all-terrain mono-drive board. Since the release of that video we've received a lot of new parts, and we finally got the parts and were able to build this board. This board is essentially the exact same board in many ways, as it has the same battery, deck, the same style of trucks, and other parts that are pretty much the same. But in this video, we put 2 motors on the board instead of 1, upgraded to fork boxes, and used the massive 100mm BOA constrictor wheels. So the rest of this video is going to be a complete review of how we built this board starting from the ground up. Okay, so the first step is to mount the Evolve Unique motor mount to the Evolve trucks using the 3 cap head screws and the 3 bolts on each truck mount. This was pretty simple. All you have to do is use a 1/8 inch hex bit and a wrench, and you just bolt it in. However, make sure you mount your motors before mounting both sides in, as it will prove difficult later on. This build will be using 2 of Torqueboard's 6374 190 kV motors with a maximum power output of 3150 watts. Just like I said, make sure you do mount the motors before mounting both trucks, because as you can see right here, it was a little difficult to put it in, and I had to undo one of the mounts in order to fit both of them on. Once both motors were in position, I was able to remount the motor mount to the trucks the same way that I had done it previously, and then I attached the motors to the Evolve motor mounts using 4 bolts that were 10mm in length. In terms of the drivetrain, this board will be using 2 285mm 15mm wide belts, 2 38-tooth Evolve orangutan pulleys from the Evolve website, and 2 15mm wide 15-tooth pulleys from Guilt-Build Kit boards. The next step is to install the keyway into the shaft of the motor, and once this is done, you can put the motor pulley over the shaft of the motor. This can be difficult if your keyway is a little tight, but as long as you're persistent, you can fit the motor pulley onto the keyway. The next step is to loosely assemble the drivetrain by putting the wheel pulleys onto the axle of the Evolve trucks. You can then take those off once you make sure they fit by putting the belts over it and then lightly spinning them so they grip the belt and align themselves with the motor pulley. This build will be using the massive 100mm BOAs with a 65mm contact patch. To put the bearings in, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is slide one onto the truck, then apply weight onto the wheel and then switch it around, put a bearing, a spacer, and then do the same thing. It's pretty standard. Yeah, and they should be good to go. The BOA wheels have the same Kegel core that matches the Evolve pulley, and it's pretty simple to put in. You just snap them together. The build will also be using the same enclosure from the last video, the custom-made enclosure for the 10S4P. And the build will also be using the same 10S4P Samsung 25R battery from DIY Electric Skateboard. We inserted the battery into the enclosure using the same Velcro that we've already had, and then we used this parallel connector for the 2 fog boxes we're going to be using. We're going to be using 2 fog boxes from Inertian. These are one of the best ESCs that money can buy. They have 60A continuous and 300 amp peak current. One of the problems we ran into was that the fog box came with XT60s and our dual VESC connector came with XT90s. So we made some connectors right here to adapt to the fog box. The 2 fog boxes are then connected in parallel to the battery using the parallel connector, and from there are then connected to each other using a CAN bus connector. The remote we're going to be using is the Inertian Nano remote and receiver. These two look very slim. They're much smaller than the one that comes with DIY electric skateboard, and it's the one that ships with the Raptor, so it's obviously very good quality. We're going to be using the exact same deck, the 41-inch downhill deck. It has a nice long wheelbase for the enclosure, and it's really stiff, and it's proven to work. So the next thing is to mount the trucks. We're using some 1/8-inch riser pads. We're also going to be using the Shred Lights mounts because we're going to use Shred Lights. And then we just mount the trucks to the deck. After having mounted the trucks to the deck, we took apart the drivetrain and rebuilt it, this time making sure to tighten everything properly, making sure to get the belt tension right. Previously we just kind of made sure everything fit together, but this time we actually put it together nice and tightly. The belt tension was adjusted by moving the motor up or down on the motor mount by unscrewing the 4mm screws. The next step is to connect the motors to the fog boxes. The fog boxes come with 3mm connectors, and the motors we used came with 5mm, so we made these extender wires that would convert the 3mm to the 5mm, and then attached the phase wires from the fog box to the phase wires of the motor. Getting both fog boxes and the various wires to fit inside the rest of the enclosure that was not consumed by the battery was very difficult, but after many combinations we were able to fit the wires in. After having programmed both fog boxes by using the BLDC tool, we were finally able to test whether the motors would work or not by connecting the Nano remote to the receiver and pushing down on the throttle. The last step is to mount the enclosure to the deck, and this was done by putting a thin piece of foam in between the deck and the enclosure to create a watertight seal, as well as prevent the enclosure from rattling with the deck. We then fastened the enclosure to the deck by using a bolt and a nut, and then screwing the nut on top of the screw through the top of the deck. An important thing to do is to make sure you would tighten the Evolve trucks, as these come very, very loose when you first get them, so you have to tighten them a lot. As soon as you have mounted everything on, the board should be done, and this is what the finished project looked like. On a side note, we finally reached 100 subscribers. Thanks to everyone who subscribed to our channel and supported us thus far. If you're new here and enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and liking the video. We'd really appreciate it, and we're trying to grow our channel. Thanks for watching so much, and we'll see you guys in the next video.